You're watching The Globe. The rand has weakened by more than 4% against the dollar as President Cyril Ramaphosa feels the heat over his Phala Phala farm scandal. The fall of the currency began yesterday as market analysts digested the findings of the Section 89 panel that's been tasked with determining whether the president has a case to answer to.
The rand fell by more than 1% yesterday. This morning, the currency strengthened against the dollar that was weakening due to other factors. It strengthened to below 17 rand to the dollar, but since then it has slid, trading dangerously close to 18 rand to the dollar. This was the picture in mid-afternoon with the rand trading at 17 rand 92 cents. The interest rates on South African 10-year bonds, reflecting the risk the market puts on them, increased, but the JSE was trading slightly higher earlier.
Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by the chief economist at the Efficient Group, Dawie Ruit. Dawie, thanks very much indeed for joining us. The last time we had a significant shift in the rand because of a political event was when Mr. Van Rooyen was appointed finance minister for 4 days. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but is this a serious matter to such a degree that we should see a shock like this on our currency?
Well, certainly I do believe that. I certainly do believe that the financial markets are obviously quite jittery about what's happening, and I think there's good reason for that. I think there are two good reasons for that. But I think what is important to understand, Peter, is that there's a certain context that we have to understand. And this context is a context of poverty, of high levels of unemployment, and of social tension. I think that is what we need to understand. And then there are two other issues that are important. The first one is, of course, policy going forward, because policy will affect the economy. And another issue that is also important is that South Africa is on the brink of getting grey listed, and the allegations against the president are exactly those kind of things that the Financial Action Task Force are concerned about. So with these kind of allegations around the president, chances certainly increase now that we could be grey listed, and if that is the case, then all sort of bad things are going to happen to the South African economy. So if you ask the question, are the financial markets right in the kind of reaction that we are currently seeing, I would say yes, certainly, we should be concerned.
So what would calm the markets? A resignation? Because then there's other questions about what happens next.
Exactly that. I don't think a resignation is necessarily going to calm the markets. In fact, I think a resignation, and personally, I believe that the president should resign, but the resignation will certainly then open the question who's going to take over from him. And there are a couple of candidates, and I'm afraid none of the candidates that I can think of off the top of my head are going to be, the financial markets are not going to be happy with. There are three possible candidates, and none of them, I believe, will make the financial markets happy. So the best case kind of scenario, I would say, is that some young guy without a tainted history somehow become more prominent. I think that could be a possibility. But for now, for the financial markets, the best is probably for the president to stay, although personally I believe that the president should go.
What signals are the markets looking for then to say, okay, we're hearing the right things? What would those signals be, and who could they possibly come from?
I'm afraid to say that I think we are in such a mess. I think there's so much infighting, so much uncertainty, so much backstabbing happening currently in the ANC in the ruling party, that I really cannot think of anything positive that can come from this. I'm really battling to see what positive can come from this. But in a way, there is some good news, and that is that I'm pretty sure we are at the beginning of the end of the ANC. This will accelerate political change, which is a good thing in itself, because things were moving in a certain direction. But like I've said, I'm very concerned about the context, the environment in which all of this is happening. We only need one small spark to get to really lead to some bad things happening in the country. I'm referring to what we saw last year, for example, in KZN, and already some of the political opponents. So maybe this is the way to answer that. Maybe what we should have now is cool-headed leadership. And that's for all political leaders. Don't say inflaming things on Twitter, for example. And that's all. It's not only political leaders, it's the religious leaders. Everybody must be aware about the the sensitive situation in which we find ourselves in South Africa, and we have calm must prevail. I guess that's a better answer.
Yeah.
But something positive coming from this, I can't see that happening in the short term.
All right. So the currency fluctuations give us some indication in terms of what the international community might be thinking. What about investors? Do they press the pause button?
Without a doubt. And not only for the next 2 or 3 months, for the next year at least, until the next election at least, to see what's going to come from the next election. So for the next year, until the next election, don't expect significant investments in South Africa. Because for the next year or whatever, we will have political instability, or it seems like it at least, and investors are not going to invest in this kind of environment. And only after the election, we want to see who's going to be the ruling party by then, maybe some kind of coalition by then, I don't know. And then, of course, we have to wait and see what policies are going to look like. One or two things are likely to remain relatively stable. One is fiscal policy. I don't think we're going to see much change in fiscal policy. I think the Minister of Finance got a good grip on that. And I'm also very happy with the governor of the South African Central Bank, the Reserve Bank. They're doing an excellent job at the moment. So those two major policy instruments are at least, I think, in fairly good hands at the moment. But of course, financial markets are trying to discount what's going to happen in the future, and we just don't know. This is a political question. We have to see how the political odds are going to fall, and investors will be looking for that before they make a long-term commitment to South Africa.
You're an economist, you've got clients. What were they phoning you about today?
They're calling me and ask me the rand's going to go to. They're calling me to ask me whether they should take the currency out, the money out of the country. They're calling me to say some of international guys are asking me if they should invest now or wait. And I tell them, listen, I don't know what the political situation is going to be like. And what they tell me is that they're going to sit on their hands. The guys taking the money out of the country, my advice to them is that we have to understand that we've got a currency that is already very weak. And for obvious reasons. So this is perhaps a bit of an overreaction by the financial markets. And once we get some kind of clarity and stability, there's a good possibility, and I'm pretty sure of that the rand will come back again. So don't look at the rand only, and don't make your investment decisions based on the exchange rate of the currency only, because that will always be volatile. But for other reasons, for investment reasons and things like that, people are sitting on their hands and they're concerned they're not going to make a long-term commitment to this country now.
Our economy, what happens in the next chapter, the next quarter, and the quarter after that?
Well, as we know, that the economy is already in a bad state because of a lack of electricity and many other things. There are many policy issues that are weighing, that are obstacles to the economy. What I am concerned about is that with this infighting in the ANC is that some sort of radical grouping may take over eventually, and I can think of a lot. Possible radical groupings within the ANC, and that could lead to eventual change in policy, more radical kind of changes, which will undermine the economy even further. So the point is that we have very high levels of unemployment and poverty and that sort of things. We have very weak economic growth because of other factors, and now we have this political uncertainty and instability in the country as well. So it's really coming at a bad time. Not good.
We heard from the presidential spokesperson. He says that the president is going to act first in the interest of the nation. If you were brought into his confidence and had to advise him, what would you tell him needs to happen, that he should do?
Well, as an economist, there are many things that needs to happen and needs to happen. But the reality is that this is more of a political question, I would say. I think what we need to do, Peter, is that we need to start somewhere to show that we are a law-abiding country, that we are a country that adhere to whatever our constitution says. And I know there's all these conspiracies, and I think there's a lot of groupings within the ruling. We all know this. The infighting in the ANC. And there are many other guys with mud on their hands as well that should have left long ago. So my advice to the president is that do the right thing. I know it's probably going to lead to somebody else worse than him taking over the leadership of the country, perhaps. I understand that, and it's going to lead to instability, maybe even further. But he must do the right thing, and I think the right thing for him is to resign. And I think for the people of South Africa, what we have to understand and what we have to have confidence in is that we have to have confidence in democracy. So trust democracy. And when you get the opportunity to go to the polling station, do the right thing. I think that this is just the process of what we call democracy. It's never going to be a straight line, and especially for South Africa, it's not something that's going to be easy. And we are taking time to mature as a democratic country. Don't be scared of democracy. But my advice to the president is that you're doing too much damage to the country. You have not been a good president so far. My advice is to resign. Let the normal processes take its normal what needs to happen according to the normal processes. Let's do that. Let's trust the Constitution and the people of the country.
All right. So in the short term, the rand will fluctuate and it's just waiting for some kind of message and then it'll stabilize.
Peter, what we need to know who's going to be the next president of South Africa, and then the next day see what the international press is going to say about that. If it is going to be Didi Mabuza, I know what the international press is going to say about him. So he's a possible candidate, because if the president resigns, the way I understand it, the deputy president will take over. Then, of course, we have the question about who's going to be the president of the ANC. That's another question. So, but if it is a deputy president, then I'm afraid the international press is not going to be nice to him.
All right. Davi, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, that's the chief economist at the Efficient Group, Davi Ruet, saying that our currency is waiting for some firm messages. His personal thing is that maybe the president needs to resign, but that could have consequences depending on who takes over from him.